Welcome to the Bend Don't Break podcast. We are powered by The Source Weekly, Bend's locally owned newspaper. This podcast is our eddy in the rushing waters of local journalism. We are glad that you're taking some of your time to listen to us chat with the people who shape our local community.
Thank you to our presenting sponsor, ReMax Key Properties, a family-owned full-service real estate brokerage specializing in residential, luxury, commercial, new construction, and ranch and land properties. Their new state-of-the-art facility at 42 Greenwood Avenue is a modern, collaborative space and the new home of the Bend Don't Break podcast recording studio.
I'm Aaron Schweitzer, publisher of The Source Weekly and host of this Bend Don't Break podcast. Today with me is Amy Formica, co-founder of Well Wired. Also not here today is Brooke Muse. She is also the co-founder of Well Wired. Amy, why don't you start by just telling us what is Well Wired, and then we'll talk about what it means to be well wired.
That's a big question.
Yeah,
the first one I can answer.
Yeah.
So Well Wired is a group that I co-founded with another mom in Bend, Brooke Muse. And we're calling it a healthy tech advocacy group and family community. And essentially it started kind of on a play date.
Yeah.
Brooke and I both have...
Has a lot of good ideas.
They do, right? Just parents talking.
Lifetime friendships and
yes.
Great ideas.
Kids are playing. We finally get a chance to dig in.
Yeah.
And talk
You've
about
got all this pent-up mental
issues.
energy. You're not running behind.
Totally.
So,
The kids are occupied, so you can
right.
get into it. And essentially, so Brooke and I both have kids. I have 3 kids, ages 10, 7, and 4. Yeah. And Brooke has also a 10-year-old, and I think her second is 8.
Okay.
And we both kind of confessed to each other on a play date recently, sort of, I think this past summer, almost about a year ago, that we were looking into middle school for our 10-year-old girls, who are now almost 5th graders, and we were panicking. We were really worried because as we started to notice that age more, thinking about what our girls would be like as pre-adolescents and adolescents, we just started to see the prevalence of phones in kids' hands and eyes down, looking at devices. And we knew anecdotally through talking to older families that social media was kind of taking over social connections for instead of in-person socializing, it was a lot of not texting anymore, but Snapchatting, Instagram posting, TikTok comments, etc.
The toxicity of middle school girls is on social media is legendary.
Very legendary.
Yeah, right.
And we did not want our daughters to have to go down that road.
Right.
And we realized in the moment as we were talking that the only way to do something about it was to change other people's minds too, or at least provide space for other people who felt similarly to us to make a similar choice. If we said to ourselves, you know what, we don't want to give phones. We don't want to do social media in middle school. We actually think it's not a good developmental time for them, our kids to be just coping with the influx of all of this sort of public, externalized, performance-based identity building. And then we knew that phones were just so addictive. It was becoming clear post-COVID that we were all sort of addicted to our devices. So we were just feeling highly uncomfortable with what that would look like. And I'm a little more extroverted. Brooke is more introverted, but we have different skill sets. So I was a theater teacher and then took time off to be a mom. And now I'm getting a master's in clinical mental health counseling. Brooke has her own experiential marketing company and studied psychology. So she sort of was thinking from a large program, what can we do? What program can we create? What event can we run? And I was like, how can we get into a room and talk to people about this? She's like, really? Talk to people? That she's more introverted.
I'm getting this vibe of this play date was a little heavier than most play dates.
It was a little intense. And I kind of left saying, Brooke, we're doing this. You're not, don't run away. Because she said, I've been thinking about this for years, something. And I said, okay, well, listen, let's try to make it happen. So, we're both really busy. She works full time. I'm in graduate school plus a mom. And so we sort of tried to grab the few moments that we had for those, in the fall, basically. And we brainstormed and we were like, well, what will this group look like? And it didn't have a name yet. And so we decided to start with listening sessions. Because we thought, well, we feel this way, but what do other parents feel? And we decided to start with elementary school families because what we felt was middle school and high schoolers were kind of already in the soup.
Yeah,
And
they're a lost cause. That ship has sailed. Let's focus on something we can change.
It's sailing. We might
right.
we could shift course, but
Right.
but a little bit better before when you're still on the dock,
Sure.
like before you've decided
Yeah.
which ship to board, right? So we had listening sessions. We started just with families that we kind of knew and had connections with, and we hosted them at Brooke's house. And we just had a sort of a question session, like, what are your concerns about tech with your kids? What are your concerns about smartphones? What do you love about using technology? What do you imagine and want for your child's future with tech? Because we are the last generation really of parents. I'm 43. That had an analog childhood. We're sort of one of the last hanging on to that. And that actually was a really precious experience. And we're sort of realizing now, I think, that some things, fundamental things, are being lost now with how much technology and how quickly the technology has changed and evolved for our kids.
You're talking to a print newspaper publisher, so
Yeah. So
analog is pretty near and dear to me.
Yes, same. And in fact, one just like quick little tidbit, we've convinced, I think, or at least offered the option of a home phone again to a lot of people who've attended the talks that we've given. Brooke and I both have home phones.
You do.
And they're amazing.
Yeah.
And our kids at first were like, how do you use this thing?
Right.
But they're incredible. And actually, they're not technical landlines. You don't plug them into the wall, like drill in, but you plug them into your wireless router. But they function the same.
Right.
So anyway, we had these listening sessions, and what became pretty clear is that elementary families that we met felt this sense of like impending doom, and they didn't know what to do about it. Like this train was moving.
Yeah.
They could see it coming toward them on the tracks. They wanted to get out of the way, but there was not an alternate track.
Right.
And so we thought, okay, well, let's start with giving talks at elementary schools. And let's just let's normalize talking about what's happening. Yeah. Because I think part of it was like, around 2015 is really when like almost like many, many kids at much younger ages started to have smartphones, and social media became kind of like a really big thing for those adolescents. And it's just accelerated. COVID obviously accelerated as well. But part of it is like nobody was talking about it as a community.
Oh, you're talking
groups.
about my children.
Right.
Yeah, those boys, we were...
How old are they?
24.
So they're the Gen Zers.
26.
Yes.
And we were the first generation to really say, well, should they have it?
Right.
And the only person you're arguing with that at that point are your kids.
Right.
The other parents were all over the map, and some were, seemed hysterical because they were saying the very things we know to be true now.
Right.
One of them being my wife. And
I'd like to talk to her.
Then you have the people on the other side who are just like, this is the way it's going to be.
It's the wave of the future.
I mean, they need to be savvy on these
Right.
phones. I was like, that seems a little odd,
Yes.
that we're going to... I've always found that argument or that thought that they are going to transform, barring some kind of thing apart from like Neuralink, muscle Neuralink. Are we really going to transform to these people where our eyeballs are glued to the screen all the time and be well? But I'm sure you're going to get to that.
Well, the other piece is too that these devices are not hard to figure out.
Yeah.
So we don't need a ton of time. Give anyone 10 to 15 minutes on a smartphone, and eventually they'll figure out how to navigate that. And really, they're meant to keep us on.
Right.
So the companies that design smartphones, social media apps, and so much of the tech that we have, they're invested in making it very easy for us to engage with and learn.
Yeah.
So needing training, from when you're 10 on up, it's clear that we don't need that anymore.
Right.
So we basically just started giving these talks, and
can I stop you right there? Because I'm seeing this like kid playing at the boat park,
and
then all of a sudden you're evolving. Now you're doing talks in your house, and it's going to keep going. I know this is going to grow, but how do you move from you're sitting on the bench,
talking to a
friend, and the next thing you know, you're doing talk sessions?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it
because I think people who are feeling like I want to be like her, are going to be like, how do I get from point A to point B?
Yes. So, I forgot an important scaffolding piece here. So first of all, we're also kind of inventing this wheel as we go. And I think part of it is you just kind of have to take a leap and try something. What we did after the listening session, so we thought, let's get some thoughts on families. We then decided to consult all the experts that we could think of in Bend who would want to weigh in on these issues. So pediatricians, child psychologists, therapists in town, the board of health, the county health department, school counselors. So we ended up, people very graciously donated their time out of really nowhere. We would email and say like, we started a group in town. It's a healthy tech group. Would you spare 30 minutes of your time to talk to us? And they almost like when you say you're a thing, you become a thing, right? So it sort of started to take on a life of its own. And everybody that we talked to had a different kernel of advice for us on kind of where to push, where to pull, how to work on this advocacy. And really what we're talking about is collective action and changing the status quo around the way we treat devices and social media access with our kids, both at home, in schools, and in the community at large. So these people gave us wonderful advice. And through that, we then decided that we would go through the PTOs at our schools. So because we're parents in the community, we had connections to some PTOs. Right. So we said, okay, let's develop a talk. Oh, and we surveyed families. So the survey was
the
cool.
energy you're talking about is blowing my mind. Like if you're a listener out there, and it's not as easy as she makes it sound.
It has taken thousands of hours. Right. Our husbands are probably going to divorce us.
And then we pulled every expert in the community, pediatricians, and I'm like,
nationally,
okay,
actually.
yeah,
I did join a really cool group. Yeah. It's called the National Screen Time Action Network. Yeah. And I had reached out to, I have a lot of teacher colleagues in other states. I taught in Seattle and New York City. And so they hooked me they knew of people who were speakers with this National Screen Time Action Network. They work on legislation, things like regulating the age of social media, for example, 13 versus 16, which is much more age appropriate and developmentally appropriate. By the way, tidbit, do you know that the age 13, why it was chosen? So 13 is the legal age you can be on a social media platform. Okay. And I thought it was like, oh, well, that must be like people have studied this. So 13 is probably the right age because in our kids' development, they're getting more independent. They want more freedom. It's not that at all.
It's just because it's a teen after it.
Because
it's not 12.
Right.
It's 13.
It's 13.
So if they're a teenager, it's
they
fine.
must need it.
Right.
And it's actually the age that they can be advertised to legally. Our laws say that you become a consumer at 13. You can be advertised to and your data can be collected. Yeah. We're not as concerned with the privacy and the data collection. We're more concerned with really? Yeah. It is really about advertising, truly, the business model of these companies, because if you keep eyeballs on the screen, then your advertisers are happy.
Yeah. And we're legal now.
Right.
We're
legal now. Yeah. So that was a great tidbit that we learned. Sure. And yes, we just basically thought if we develop a talk, and we had done a ton of research. So Jonathan Haidt, he's written a book called The Anxious Generation recently, but he's a psychologist out of NYU who's been doing work on this for years. Yeah. He compiled a ton of data along with a couple of other people who are really concerned about this issue. They started to notice troubling trends in youth mental health, especially with Gen Z, the generation that's been kind of raised with devices pretty embedded in their lives from childhood. So he actually has an open source Google Doc with all of the data that he can pull and all of these other notable
Did you get on it?
Yeah. So Brooke started, she did a deep dive. She loves research. She just did a total deep dive. And I did the networking of who are we talking to? How can I find? And I'm good at that. That is something that I have found for anyone out there who wants to do something sort of advocacy based. I do think a lot of it is making connections to people and then remembering who's connected to who and how you can kind of build upon that. Yeah. And then also having some chops to back it up. So Brooke is as we're starting this, she's gathering all this research and data, and we've got charts and graphs, and we've got pretty clear evidence now that we didn't have when your kids, when you were wrestling with that.
So I'm trying to stay on the timeline here. So you're doing these groups, you do all this research, but did you have a clear idea of where you wanted to go with all this energy?
Initially we did. So the goal initially was we need to get families to delay giving smartphones and social media access to their kids until at least high school. Okay. And that was if we do these talks.
Because you had middle schoolers coming in.
We had 10-year-olds about to be in middle school, and we thought we'll only do this. We'll only ourselves be able to resist if other people do it too. So we thought, okay, if we give these talks and we educate families about the youth mental health crisis and about what we know now about persuasive design with smartphones and social media, about brain science, and then give them a plan. Right. As a community, hey, in Bend, we're this hyper local advocacy group, and we're saying we're all sitting in this room. Let's do it together. Yeah. Initially, though, we weren't sure how. We thought, let's do the education piece, and then we knew if people liked the talk and felt like we were speaking in a communal way, not shaming anyone, but just providing an option for some other way. We thought, okay, well, then we'll have all these people who we've kind of built a relationship with, or at least think, okay, yeah, I feel that way too. Then the question is, how do you capture that? Is it just we're all aware that we exist and we still are in our little pockets with our friends and we just make plans with like, 3 other families? Or is it a pledge of some sort, which is, and those types of pledges to delay, have been happening for a long time. Actually, like wait until 8th is kind of a notable.
I'm just going to guess you have the research on those pledges, and I'm going to guess it's not very good.
I don't know, actually. Okay. I haven't. It probably wasn't when wait until 8th came out like 10 to 15 years ago. Although actually, when they have
wait until 8th.
Yes, although that group, they are doing great things to try to delay. But I will say it's a little frustrating because the rhyme is a really good rhyme, but people have been misinterpreting it for years. So what they actually say is, what they mean is wait until after 8th grade. Okay. They mean wait until high school. Yeah. And because it's wait until 8th, everyone thinks, oh, at the beginning of 8th grade, which is actually a really hard time if you're trying to change the status quo to put smartphones, because then the 6th and 7th graders like, oh, 8th graders have them. That's the cool thing.
Yeah.
So anywho, the pledge was something we debated. And then honestly, as this group has evolved and we've talked to more people and we've asked them, we survey them after, would a pledge be something that would help you? And not everyone needs to participate, but some people like the idea of that, like kind of community, the momentum, the accountability, like, yeah, we're doing this. And many of our surveys are showing that pledges actually would help people and they would feel really good about it, at least here in Bend.
I'm a pledge doubter.
I was too.
Put me in the pledge doubt column.
I was too. Yeah. I actually remember sitting in my kitchen with Brooke when we were designing the talk and thinking, you know what, Brooke, I don't even think I would sign a pledge. And I know the research, but now that I've continued doing the research, done the talks, talked to so many families. And honestly, even in the last 6 months since we started, so much more data and research has come out. The Surgeon General has now issued.
Well, we should probably skip to the punchline, because so people know the end result of all this that you pushed to was going before sending information to the school district. Correct?
Yes. Well, that was so. It's a little more nuanced. Okay. So what happened as we were doing all these talks, and we will, by the way, launch a pledge this summer in Bend. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see. And people can join if they want or not.
I can see myself supporting it more and more the more you talk. Well, actually, but I'll still in the doubt column.
Understandable. And it's totally fine. I honor that. I do. I hold space for that. Everybody it really is person and family dependent.
I'm ready to be proved wrong.
But you know what? Well, what's cool is the pledges are happening like all over the country and internationally as well. So we just were reading an article about this pledge in England that like within 48 hours, these moms were like, we're going to have a smartphone free childhood. Yeah. And they've said, wait until high school, wait until 16 for social media, which is what the Surgeon General is now recommending. Yeah. And within like 48 hours, they had like 5,000 signatures.
Yeah, how many people actually
will stick
their phone away from their kid?
Right. So that's why we want to get, so our thought is.
I mean, I could make the pledge, and then when I came home, my middle schooler was going to be like, what?
What's the accountability?
And we're not, you're not taking my phone.
Right.
I will kill you.
So the pledge probably would function more for people coming up as opposed to the middle and high school kids who already have their devices.
The lost generation.
There's things we can do to like talk and build connection and share and talk about healthy limits and boundaries. But the elementary into upper elementary, and then rising into middle school, that would be a really good time because our thought is if, for example, at Pacific Crest Middle School or at Pilot Butte Middle School, right? If the incoming 6th grade families know that there's a pledge going on in that middle school for 6th grade families, and they're like, oh, 50 people have already said they're going to wait.
I can see that.
Then all of a sudden, that's great because it's not kind of wait till 8th is also hard because it's national, but this is really neighborhood to neighborhood, school to school. Right. These are people that you're going to be depending on.
So
right?
you're going to put this pledge out.
Yeah. Yeah.
How many middle schools?
All of them.
All of the middle schools.
And through all of Bend.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's your mechanism for getting this in place?
That we're figuring out. Yeah. So if you have any advice, let us know. We were thinking, kind of like some of the petition websites could work for a pledge. We want it to be kind of simple, but also not just what you're choosing not to do, like I'm going to delay, but also what you're gaining. So what the benefit is. Just a quick, so what we were thinking is because the smartphone piece, smartphones have become kind of experience blockers for kids. Gen Z is like a highly risk averse generation, actually, in part because there's this over reliance on the device and less kind of connection in person, less like going out into the world. So part of what we want to do too is build a set of outdoor experiences, kind of in-person independence building events. And we were also thinking about like some sort of incentive program, which we still have to work out with local businesses in the communities that support outdoor education or arts-based businesses where there can be some kind of small token or reward as kids kind of work through the delaying process with their families, because really getting everyone involved.
While you're getting your master's.
While I'm getting my master's. And I want to get back to the school advocacy because I didn't answer that.
I'm very interested in that because that's what caught our eye.
Yeah, right. That's what we were originally going to talk about. Sorry, we'll get there.
Hey.
It's also important. So we have the delaying smartphones and social media piece. Then we have the outdoor-based play, independent experiences piece. And the school advocacy piece came out of the surveys that we did from those initial listening sessions. So what we found, and we were kind of surprised, we asked families like, what were your most important, what could we do to support you? Would you want events for children, events for parents, school advocacy, data and research, experts in the community talking about parenting? And overwhelmingly, like over 75% of families said school advocacy. We thought, school advocacy, okay, what does that mean? And then we realized K through 12, every kid in Ben Lapine has an iPad. And a lot of the curriculum now is iPad based, especially in the middle schools. I don't know as much about the high schools.
Again, my kids were the first ones to get the iPad.
Yes, in like 2013-ish. Yes. So now we said, okay. And we had noticed it. You know, I was pretty surprised when I moved here and my second grader came home and was like, I'm getting my iPad. And I thought she was totally confused because we had moved from the East Coast. They didn't have tech. And I said, oh, no, honey. Your teacher probably meant, you know, like in middle school, you'll get your iPad, you know, or when you're older, not this year. And sure enough, the next day she came home with it and it was her personal iPad. So I recognize why this happened. And it's happened in schools all over the country, which is that there's become this one-to-one device policy, which the thought was we want to make it fair for everyone. Not every kid has like a really cool laptop at home, you know, and when we do more things, and tech was the wave of the future, and, you know, look at all this curriculum we can do.
That was the big one, was like, if they're not learning on here, what are they going to be doing?
Out.
Writing on paper like cavemen?
Which is what we're advocating for, to go back to all of it.
Right.
So,
I mean, and they were all hacking the pads. And they had the games on there.
It's happening
and they
even
were doing,
more so.
Yeah, and the kids know. And it was hilarious to me that the administration thought they were going to outsmart an ocean of kids who are like sharing. Yeah.
Go on Google Docs and send messages to each other.
It's going to get even crazier with AI. I've heard, you know, 100%. You can just get it to read it back to you. So
yeah, the AI piece is like a topic for another time, which I still have to educate myself on. But yes, the same issues you're talking about with iPads are still happening. And they kind of vary based on if it's elementary, middle, or high school. But in elementary, for example, there's a lot of iPad use as a reward. So like during downtime, or if you finished this math worksheet, then you can do this,
go watch a
you
movie.
know, right. Or there's a self-service menu for the kids with like hundreds of apps, and they're educational, but they're really gamified. And honestly, most parents we talk to would much rather their kids draw or chat with a friend or just get an extra recess outside, you know? So we've become, and honestly, I think a lot of that was COVID too, because when kids came back from school, to school from COVID, iPads kind of helped everyone social distance. Like kids were quiet during snack time when they had their iPad, so they weren't talking and spewing germs. I mean, it's funny how like these things kind of become habitual then, right? And this is no fault of the teachers. I was a teacher. I'm so supportive of my kids' teachers, and they're incredible. They're trying to navigate this just the way we all are. But I think what we realize is the district on a larger scale needed to be setting more intentional policy about what was on the iPads. So like YouTube is on the iPads, Safari, you can go anywhere you want, essentially. The firewalls, the blocking doesn't work.
They'll tell you they block it.
They will, and they have, and we're meeting with them.
Can't.
And we have to just keep hammering home. It's just not working, and it hasn't been working for years. So that, coupled with the fact that a lot of the curriculum, like in middle school, almost the entire math curriculum is on iPad, as far as I know. And parents are saying, like, why are they struggling to like zoom into this little screen? And they're saying, oh, I can't use scratch paper. It has to be done on the screen. It's like, this is not serving our kids, right? So we decided that with school advocacy, we were going to really focus on the iPad piece, and also actually the phone feeds into that, because schools all over the country are now recognizing that phones in schools are problematic for distraction, attention, engagement, cyberbullying.
Well, you probably saw that article. I mean, one of the things that, while I remain a pledged skeptic, that I am very pro, is I read an article about a school that had purchased the same kind of bags that you get at concerts.
Yonder pouches. Yeah.
They're, now
There's a representative in Hood River I was on the phone with.
That's a real thing.
Yeah,
like
it's a
if
real
you
thing.
could, and the experiments that I've read about where they've implemented in schools have been very successful.
They have been.
While it's been somewhat, I love the fact that they're all reporting this certain kind of trauma on
to
the
be
front
away
end.
from the
like as
phone.
soon as they implement it, there's they've got to go through this chaotic, complaint, and the parents are thrown into turmoil, which shows you how deep the
it's an
penetration
addiction.
is.
Yeah. I mean, these devices are highly addictive.
Yeah.
They're designed to be. Kids are addicted to them. Kids know that they're addicted to them when they really can think back. And there are some kids who are kind of upper high school, Gen Zers, even kind of looking back and thinking, I wish my parents or my school had set firmer limits. So, so we're basically pushing for phone-free school policy. If it's not at the district level, we're hoping the state level. We actually have been working with Emerson Levy, our representative here, and we've done 2 virtual presentations for her. The House Education Committee did a phone-free schools kind of exploration. And then just last week, we did a virtual forum with the Attorney General, Representative Levy, and Representative Lisa Reynolds, who's a pediatrician and also a rep. And we were also on the panel, and we presented about phone-free schools, and we shared exactly the data you're talking about, that when schools are phone-free, here are all the successes that we hear, and here are the ways that you can do it to get buy-in from teachers, students, parents, because there are parents who do feel concerned about certain issues, safety issues and communication issues. But from our data, we surveyed almost 1,000 families here in Ben Lapine. That was part of our school advocacy as we sent out a survey. 93% of those families want phone-free schools.
I have a friend who's Finnish. He has a Finnish company, and his company designs these watches. And maybe you've heard of them, but they are trying to do the same thing where the watch serves to allow parents to transition a little bit because they can text comes over.
Yes.
They can call them.
Yes.
Friends can send them messages.
They're sort of simple. They're dumber.
And so
devices.
people they go, oh, it's a trade out. You give me the phone, I give you this piece of tech, and they've had great transition rates, and of course Finland being Finland is working hard.
I'd love to hear the name of that watch when you can.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'll send it.
Well, we also in our talk about those alternate devices you can use to scaffold and bridge. We're really thinking about what's best for kids in their development, and then how can tech support that as opposed to derail that. And so dumb watches like the Gizmo watch, the Gab watch. There's light phones, bark phones, flip phones.
Right.
We want to make them cool again.
Right. Well, I know the biggest challenge that he talked to me about it, because of course I was fascinated, was critical mass. Getting to a point where you get a class that has a majority.
Yes.
Because if you're a young parent, I don't want you to lose heart when I say this.
No,
but
I understand.
You have
We're a little
so
naive.
little control when they start getting into that school environment and they're on their phones, because the phones serve as another massive source of information and
connection,
peers,
belonging.
And that you end up just kind of like, your role just becomes smaller.
Yes, and that is very natural in our kids' development, and that's exactly why we thought we have to talk to other families, because yes, we were like, we can't do it. By the time my daughter's 13, I'm not going to be choosing her friends. Right. I'm not going to be setting up play dates, right? Or even when she's 11, probably. Right. So how can we kind of create a buffer zone for all of our kids to say, hey, you can have all the freedom you want to be peer focused, to not really want to come chat with mom every night, but please do still come. Yeah. And while you're in the midst of all that, let's make sure that there's just less presence of these addictive devices. And the social media piece is really huge, because especially for girls, you see really high rates of anxiety and depression associated with social media use and really problematic content, hours spent. Boys less so with social media, although still boys a little bit more gaming, pornography, Reddit forums, things like that. But Reddit is social media. But the Surgeon General really has said in 2 back-to-back, one advisory and then one recommendation, that the social media is contributing to the youth mental health crisis. And he recommends like a few key points. Number 1, waiting until 16, if not later, to allow your kids social media access. And then another piece of it is phone-free schools, giving kids time away from the devices so that they can socialize in person. And then the third part is finding like-minded families in community to all delay together, to your point.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing that, that's what I put my hope in for this thing, is that things like legislation, pouches arriving funded by taxpayers who recognize this kind of thing. I think it's unfair when it's put on parents. God love, it's got to be a groundswell of support from folks, but man, that is such a battle. And
parenting is hard enough, and this is the biggest parenting challenge of our generation, and we kind of all need support around it. Yeah, so it would be amazing to have the structures around us. That's where it goes back to the school district, and we're saying, please provide our kids a structure. Everyone has their heart in the right place. Everybody's well-intentioned. Nobody's trying to harm our kids or to say, well, we don't want anything that educational.
Some people are.
Okay, well, let's say in our school district, let's honor them. Right. We'll give them some, benefit of the doubt. And we have made miscalculations along the way, and now's a good inflection point for us to pause, think, and as we're moving forward, just be more intentional about the choices we make and really think about what's best for our kids. Back to the analog childhood. Yeah. And keep tech where you can for when it really elevates what's happening. Yeah. Like right now,
We're at the end of our time, kind of unbelievably.
It flies by when
fast.
Yeah. I can talk about this all day.
Oh. What any things that you'd like to say to listeners before we part?
Just that I really appreciate having the conversation in Bend, and that we've spoken to 600 or more families already in Bend La Pine, and we're going to additional schools next year. We're already booked at a few elementary schools and more coming. And not everybody is totally aligned with everything that Brooke and I are saying. And Brooke and I aren't always totally aligned either. But it's a learning process. And I just appreciate families who have been so open, and the school district, all of the experts in this community, the psychologists, the pediatricians, who are just they really care. We really care as a community about our kids. This isn't about judging or shaming or taking anything horribly, joyful away from our kids. It's about giving something back to our children. Right. And at the right time, allowing them to prepare for, quote, the future of in tech. But that really has to be done thoughtfully and at the right time.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in and sharing. I'm sure. One last thing before we part.
Yeah.
So from park bench to sitting with Rep. Levy
and the Attorney General,
and the Attorney. Give me what's the timeline? How long did that take? How long have you been working?
Attorney General was last week, so that's mid-June, and I think our first talk, we started designing the talks in the fall, but I think our first talk was February.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Your next project
is speaks to the need.
Yeah. But I think the next project is you write a book on activism and,
okay.
and really help people figure out how to cage their own personal energy. Well,
last thing, in this stage of our lives, being generative. I was just taking like a lifespan development class, and part of my master's in counseling is like, generative. We're in the generative phase. We never have to stop learning or growing, trying new things. So I want to throw that out to the world.
I feel like I'm in the cynical phase is at the end.
Generatively cynical?
I need to be generative. I'm going to start using that more.
To that a little.
Well, Amy, thank you for coming in. This has been the Bend Don't Break podcast. Amy Formica, co-founder of Well Wired, has been with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Bend Don't Break podcast, powered by The Source Weekly. To read, hear, and see more of what we do, go to bensource.com.